Welcome to Data Skeptic Ad Tech. Today on the show, I interview Nathan Janos. He's got over a decade of experience in online advertising and digital marketing. We talk about the mechanics of how those systems work, his experience, and how data science teams can use algorithms to optimize digital marketing efforts. After that, we speculate a bit about the future of online advertising. So it's been a minute. I don't know if you realize this, you were the first guest on the show.
I do remember that.
So here we are, the final episode of Data Skeptic. We're going to bookend it.
Oh, that's super
No,
cool.
we'll talk again in 8 years.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I look forward to that.
And I don't know, we can look at the numbers and guess how many people will have listened to that, but we talked about advertiser attribution. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned to you, we're going into this new season. It's about ad tech. Mm-hmm. You're actually my first interview in the chronological scheme of things recording. So I thought we could have just a broad discussion about what ad tech is, things you've learned from doing it, participating in it, being advertised to, and all of the above.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
But let's start out in the basics. When is the first line of code for you?
The first line of code
that you wrote?
That I wrote.
Yeah.
Probably some logo back in second grade or something like that. And then really QBasic in sort of high school or before, maybe middle school, QBasic, yeah.
So were you all in? Like, what was your journey like academically and where you thought you were going to go?
Well, computers were super interesting. I got my first computer, or my dad got our first computer when in the mid 80s, maybe it was 1986, is a Tandy 1000 SX. And I was from then on into computers. I was into math too. But yeah, as soon as I could start having computers do stuff for me, I became very interested. I think maybe the first time I realized maybe what I wanted to do, and maybe there's a thread from then till now, is when I was learning about simpler neural networks. There was another neural network sort of phase in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And I programmed my first neural network, or I think I did. And I was teaching it how to do something like multiply. I don't even know if that's really a valid thing, but I think I taught it how to multiply two numbers, and it was super amazing to me. And I ran upstairs. And my parents were upstairs, watching TV, and I said, I just got it to multiply two numbers. And they weren't very impressed about that. But I think around that same time, maybe that same week, I ran upstairs and I saw my dad watching the financial channel, and you see all the stock tickers running across the bottom of the screen. I was like, I wonder if you could have neural networks predict those prices. And I think that was sort of the beginning of all of it.
And what brought you to your first professional position in the industry of ad tech?
Well, I did not plan this out. I didn't graduate from college and say I wanted to go into ad tech. Mm-hmm. I just needed a job. And I was in Los Angeles. I landed here. I was living with a friend in a tool shack in the mountains. And I ran out of money. I was looking for a job. I got a job doing some web application programming in Java, and I didn't find that stuff very interesting at all. So I was looking for another job in business.com. I interviewed for the same kind of thing, but they said, "Oh, we also have this guy who's doing some consulting. He has a bunch of MATLAB code, and we don't know what it does." and do you know MATLAB? And so I sort of stretched the truth a little bit. I had programmed some MATLAB in college, and I said, "Sure, I do." And so they threw me like a 50-page printout of MATLAB and said, "Can you figure out how to make this work?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." And so that was my entry into ad tech. And what that code did effectively was the beginning of my ad tech career. It was we were trying to reverse engineer Google's pricing algorithms essentially. And you know about this stuff.
Well, yeah, we know something the listeners don't know. That's actually where we first met.
That's right.
Yeah. So I was kind of late in the game from one perspective. You'd been there a while. The team was established. You had a lot of stuff running. What was that stuff doing?
It was bidding. It was bidding on pay-per-click traffic on Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, Ask. And we were bidding on millions of dollars of traffic a month probably. We were buying keywords. You could think of what we were doing kind of like digital phone book entries, and so we were buying keywords for plumbers in Los Angeles, and then we would drive traffic from Google, from that search page, to a listing page, what we called a standard listing page, that had a listing of plumbers. And so we had a whole sales team, which were all cool people too, and they were calling up plumbers and saying like, "Hey, do you want to advertise with business.com? Mm-hmm. We'll drive traffic to your site. We'll have people call you. They'll have different types of offerings, and we'll get you we'll get you clicks or calls for $2. And that was, and then, what we were doing the algorithms to acquire this traffic, hopefully less than that. So there was a margin to make.
So where's the key value add? I mean, I can go and be a plumber, say, whenever someone searches plumbers, I'll pay X amount of dollars. What does a small business need a service provider to actually do? What are the services rendered?
Well, I think the sort of the most honest answer there is it increases your footprint. So when maybe more back in this time, and 10 or 15 years ago, when you would go to Google, you'd search for a plumber. So you're going to be dependent on Google to have answers pop up that are going to help you find a plumber. Who knows what you're actually searching for? Let's assume that you actually have a broken toilet, or maybe there's water shooting out of your wall and you need someone. There's going to be organic listings that come up, and so what you're doing, do your local plumbers have SEO working on their sites so they can find them? I don't know, probably not, but maybe they do. And so one of the other ways that those local plumbers can show up there is through those paid search results. They're on that at that point in time on the right rail. Now they're at the top or all over the place, but so you can increase your targeted footprint if someone's searching for a plumber. And I guess plumbers are willing to, in this case, pay for that service to get their name out there.
So it's not just, you have to pay to participate, but it's not like the guy who pays the most shows up for sure at the top. There's a bit more to it. What are some of the mechanics that someone has to contend with?
Yeah, so there's a behavioral mechanic, and that usually boils down to what you might call like a proxy of behavior or interest, which is usually something like CTR, the click-through rate. And so that's a measure of how relevant that listing might be. So you have to think of what Google's trying to do as a business too. So they're trying to make money, right? And so they have a bunch of people advertising with them, and they want to yield manage to maximize the revenue that they're going to generate. They want to spend all those budgets. And so you don't want to put just the guy who's willing to pay the most at the top, because it might not be the clickiest link, and you're not going to actually be able to spend their budget. So it might turn out that you put the guy that's spending the least per click, or maybe has a deeper budget, but he gets clicked on a lot, and maybe you want to mix that into the top. And I think there's an assumption here that we're playing with it. Usually things at the top, we're saying that top get clicked on more. And that's one of the things you're trying to model is what is the click-through rate as a function of rank on the page.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting things that I don't think most listeners are going to know if they haven't had their hands on that data like we have. If an ad gets shown, I'm in the first place, I'm rank 1. If for some reason I'm below that, I'm rank 2, 3, 4. All that's tracked. So we've got a lot of statistics and analytics. What are some of the general shapes of these distributions?
Well, the general shapes of these things, you can model them with different types of distributions, but the general shape of these things are that they fall off exponentially. You can kind of assume a smooth exponential fall off per rank for most of the ranks, but then there are other, I'd say, like discontinuities. Sometimes if you go down what they call below the fold, so you have to scroll down or go to the next page, there's going to be discontinuities in these. And also, maybe that ranking isn't a smooth sort of space if some of it's on the right rail or some of it's at the top or some of it's at the bottom. There's different elements there. But in general, you see what you can just sort of assume that there's a great decrease as you go down the ranks. There's a lot more people click on the top than on the bottom. And sometimes there's also an effect. So it's not always a monotonic effect. I have seen cases where the bottom thing also has a little bump. So
interesting.
I have a colleague who called that the ramp. So, you do still have a lot more people to click up at the top, and it decreases sort of exponentially as you go down, but then there's a little bump at the bottom.
Is there an intuitive understanding for why that ramp is there?
Well, some people would say it's because people accidentally click on the bottom of the page when they're scrolling on their phone. You're getting towards modeling something deeper, and something I think is even more interesting than this is there's a human behavior, like where are the eyes looking? How do the eyes move across the page when they see certain key terms, or key terms juxtaposed next to other key terms? Are they skipping around? And so I think it's natural to think that your eye is going to kind of check out the top thing, and then maybe a little bit of the middle, and then maybe also the bottom. That's how I can explain it, really.
So we had these relationships with these advertisers. We were going to do their digital marketing on these search engines. Where's the optimization problem in all this?
as say business.com in this case, there's a analogous problem to what Google has. It's a yield management problem at the end of the day. And so it's fun thinking about this. So you talk about the advertising funnel, and everyone has their impression and their click, but really there's lots of entities that live along this advertising funnel. And I always like to say that, somebody's click is another person's impression.
Yeah, very true.
In this case, say we have algorithms that are buying traffic off of Google, targeting in on people's interest for a plumber in this case. That click that we pay for from Google also becomes an impression on our standard listings page. And now we have the same problem that Google has. Maybe it's in a much smaller universe of advertisers, but we have 20 plumbers and we can only fit 5 on the page. We know, again, that the person's only going to check out the top 5 things. Which 5 do we put there? And so that's another problem. The same problem Google has, but on a smaller scale. So you have to yield manage that.
What kind of controls do I have? Obviously, the bid's the major lever. Do I have any other buttons and pulleys that I can do to kind of tweak the campaign in interesting ways?
Yeah, there are other elements. There's the ad copy. And the rules for ad copy are sort of fluid. They've changed over the last 10 or 20 years probably. So there's rules in the ad copy, like you can't have all caps and exclamation points. Wow.
Grab that.
Well, that might be the food.
Thanks to our annual sponsor, Weights and Biases, the developer-first ML platform. Weights and Biases is an enterprise-grade platform that gives you experiment tracking, dataset versioning, and model management. Their solution integrates with TensorFlow, sklearn, XGBoost, Hugging Face, and literally every other framework I could think of. Integrating with your model training process takes just a few lines of code. And there's even a nice live notebook on their site that'll show you how to get it going. Once your machine learning code base or notebook is wired up, you've just unlocked the next level of productivity. The Weights and Biases platform collects, aggregates, and beautifully displays all of your key metrics and telemetry so you can track your model training in real time and compare different runs. Have you ever had to screenshot a matplotlib graph that you drop in an email or in Slack to show your boss the results of your work? That's like serving a gourmet dinner in a cardboard box. With Weights and Biases, all of your collaborators can see the results of different runs with an idealized interactive suite of tools. You no longer have to be the single source of truth for your whole organization about how the model's doing. If you're on or leading a growing team of machine learning practitioners, you need to investigate if Weights and Biases is the right solution for you. Get started at w&b.me/dataskeptic and mention us when you request a demo. Hi, I'm another one of those podcast ads that you've managed to tune out so effectively. It's okay, I get it. Listening to podcasts comes with some degree of ad fatigue. But today, you need to listen up because I'm here to tell you about ad fatigue's sinister cousin, alert fatigue. Did you know the average company receives 11,000 security alerts each day? How can a security team stay on top of the most critical threat risks when they can't find the signal in all the noise? Well, they can't, which makes it easy for IT teams to fall victim to alert fatigue, making your company dangerously vulnerable. So you have 2 choices. Buy all the tools you can until you've made your security operations overwhelmingly complex and totally ineffective, or you can run with the pack. Arctic Wolf is the industry leader in security operations solutions, delivering 24/7 monitoring, assessment, and response through their patented concierge security model. Arctic Wolf works with your existing tools and becomes an extension of your existing IT team, and they never get fatigued. Got your attention now, didn't I? Visit arcticwolf.com/skeptic to learn more. That's arcticwolf.com/skeptic.
The other controls, there's ad copy. So you can control that. You can do sort of keyword replacement in ad copy. So you could have a replacement for the city. And so maybe you could advertise with Google, plumbers in city. And then Google will help you replace that with Los Angeles or Chicago or wherever for people that are searching that area. And that can help with the click-through rate of that kind of advertisement. There are other more nuanced things. So your account structure, depending on how you think Google is operating with the account structure and how they're aggregating data and how they're using data, you might be able to modulate your account structure in certain ways, like how many ad groups you have in a campaign or how many keywords you have in an ad group. in theory, you can come up with hypotheses about ways that you might want to change that to your advantage. There's time of day kind of effects. You might want to look at when you bid. There's maybe budget effects. How much do you budget? It's all a game of figuring out what Google's not telling you what they're doing, and you're trying to sort of figure that out. Using the observations, the observability of what you can see. So that's kind of why it's fun.
So there's a bunch of mathematical tools we can use here when it comes to like the ad copies. Should or shouldn't we put the city name in? We can probably A/B test stuff like that. When we try out different keywords, maybe there's some multi-arm bandit here. Of course, there's a lot of optimization, model fitting for bids and CTRs and stuff like this. Where do you find is a good investment of time? What really returns value for the mathematical investment?
Honestly, at the end of the day, you're going to get most of the bang for your buck, most of the bang for your effort out of like your first most basic models. So at business.com, we use generalized linear models. So that was one of the techniques we used. But I think you can really get a lot of bang for your buck out of standard regression type models. In a lot of cases, what you're trying to do is forecast the cost of something at a certain position, or forecast the expected return on a click, or the expected value of a click. There are very sophisticated models you could throw at these things, but also there are very basic models. You could use a rolling mean. A rolling mean is going to be, maybe you're going to miss out on some of the nuances that, some sort of model that picks out the seasonality or other cycles out of the data, but what you get is it's more stable. And so it's not going to do a terribly wrong thing ever. And there's something to be said for that, especially a lot of these data sets are sparse. There can be jolts to the system. There are other larger things going on that a lot of math models or many models won't pick up, like a big advertiser coming in and out of the ecosystem. You have maybe Walmart's coming in and out, or they mismanage their budget and all of a sudden they're out of the market. That can cause huge discontinuities in your models. And maybe what you want to do is, and I have looked at models like that where you look at the advertisers as an effect as well. When you have that data, you don't always have it, but the advertisers that you're bidding against can have a huge effect on the system as well. But I guess what I'm saying is you can overthink this easily, and I think that's sort of like one of the dirty secrets. But what you want to do is come up with something that's good, and then have a computer do it. And I think it also helps to kind of pull apart. There's models, there's optimizations, there's rules, and a model isn't the end of the game. A model is going to tell you something like, here's what you can expect for the value of this click at this time from this advertiser on this keyword or whatever. But now you're going to do something with that, and maybe you have a simpler rule or policy or something that fits into that. Actually, you want to convert that at some level and translate that into a bid. That's your lever at the end of the day. A lot of these things, there is account structure, like I mentioned, but that's your lever. So whatever you do, you're going to have to come up with a bid at the end of the day, and you're going to have to push it out to Google and say, that's what I think this is worth to me. And so there could be a lot of sophistication in a model. You can use that in a simple rule, or the other way around. Maybe you have a really simple model and a really sophisticated set of rules. A lot of times these rules are sort of hand-rolled. They're sort of, you got maybe marketing experts that are maybe not as technical, but they're very smart about how the market really works. They have they maybe have a non-mathematical but still accurate feel about how the dynamics of the system work, and maybe they're helping with these rules.
So when you bring all that together, I mean, is there a cost benefit here? How big do I have to be before it's worth going beyond following the wizard that Google would help me set up and just do the default way? How much value can we squeeze out of all these efforts?
Well, I don't think it's probably worth it for the plumber to be worrying about this
on their own. Yeah,
and that's why that's why they would go to somebody to help them, or maybe just they would go to Google and have some of Google's algorithms help them. It's going to be companies that have big verticals, or have exposure across many verticals or many categories of advertising. It's going to be situations where you have optimization efforts that you're trying to make money on millions of dollars of spend a day. And then when you get 2% efficiency improvement on something that actually translates into a lot of money, and really what that does is those little kinds of movements can let you push other players out of the market. if you're big enough, you're competing against other people sort of like this. And if you're a little bit more efficient, that can actually have a huge effect on your ability to compete.
There's something seemingly virtuous about the pay-per-click environment that Google will show your ad or whatever search engine so many times. If they decide people don't like your ad, they'll stop showing it, which is a challenge if you want your ad to show, but sounds right. And then they're going to charge you if and only if someone clicks on it. And that click seems to carry with it an intention, or an interest. As long as your ad wasn't misleading, someone clicked on it, they must want to learn more. That's a positive. So it sounds like we have these really strong signals we can optimize towards. But I haven't talked about the big elephant in the room yet, which is fraud. What's the motivation for fraud in these markets, and how does it show up in the data?
Well, I myself, I haven't committed fraud that I know of, so I'm not an expert at committing fraud. But I'll tell you my sort of impression of how it works is that there's loopholes, there's sort of blind spots in everything that we've talked about, and there's people that will exploit those. There's technical exploits that you can use to have short-term advantage, to make short-term gains. And there are people that are experts at these, and most companies will have these types of experts as more like white hats. Like this is how it can be done. This is what we want to avoid, or this is maybe the people that we're competing against, and these are the things we want to look for. Maybe we can even help Google find them. But a lot of this is sort of it's short-term. They're short-term exploits, and you might make a lot of money for weeks or a month, but as soon as someone finds you out, you're gonna be cut out, and it's just not a long-term business strategy. And at the end of the day, the reason all this works, like you were mentioning, is that somebody is buying the product of those people that are advertising, and so you can kind of follow that data through, and you'll have what, say, Google will do is look at tranches of traffic, and they kind of know what the conversion rate should be for these things, and they know how many people should be buying something from their advertisers in a certain tranche of traffic. And if something seems out of place, they're able to track that back and figure out who it is eventually, and then kind of slap those people on the wrist, usually, probably. Maybe they'll move on and find the next exploit. It is a bit of a whack-a-mole game. Overall, the machine has gotten better over the years. It's harder to exploit. I think everyone who's in this world knows that there's some base level of fraud going on. It could be, like maybe it's not even fraud. Maybe it's maybe there's behavioral things that are going on, like little buttons that are so little you hit it with your thumb. I have big fingers, and so I think I've clicked on these things before in accident. I didn't probably end up buying the product because that wasn't my intention, and so decreased the click-through rate. But that was a sort of erroneous signal that's a part of the baseline, part of the thing that you're going to have to model and understand when you're working with these things. But yeah, at the end of the day, if you're not helping, say in this case, Google's customers make money, the customers are going to go back to Google and say, hey, what are we paying you for? Google will come back to, say, business.com and say, hey, business.com, why are you maybe that's not the best example, but they'll go back to their partners and say, why are you sending this traffic? And and you're gonna, and in some cases there's this ad funnel, right? And you go right up the chain. It might be passing through a dozen different things before it gets there. And if you're in it for the long term, and there's got to be a quality control signal, there's some baseline of quality that has to be maintained. And at the end of the day, if the whole value chain isn't working, someone will know.
What's evolved in the time you've been in this space? Has the platforms changed, your approaches? Certainly something's evolved through time.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a ton of different answers there, and people that are better suited to talk about the nuances of how, Google's rules and everything. Usually there's experts at a company that keep track of all the little moves that Google makes every day, every week, every month. But kind of stepping back, I think search is changing. People are doing things other than Google searches now to find products. And I think that's a big thing that's changing, and I think Google knows it. And I think there's even a little bit of a sense that Google isn't actually returning the best results anymore.
Yeah?
Yeah, and Google makes, I don't know what it is, 90% plus of its revenue off of these search results. Right? And people are finding things through Instagram and YouTube, and there are other avenues that people are discovering products through. And so I think search is changing. It's diversifying. I don't think anyone knows how this is going to play out, but I think the big players know that it's going beyond that, beyond the search box right now. Yeah, I don't think people know how that's going to play out, but that definitely seems like a big shift. It's a slow motion thing that's moving right now, to me.
And what do data scientists and analytically minded people do in response?
We abstract. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is acquiring clicks of interested people, and whether or not that click is on a search engine or Facebook or on a content site or an Amazon link. Those are all different types of impressions. They're different types of things that we can collect data on. So you kind of have to step out one layer, and the same sort of general principles apply. But now you're going to be getting data from a more varied array of sources. The dynamics, like what the click-through rate is on Facebook versus Google search, is going to be quite different. But it's still a click-through rate, so you can still sort of assemble these same kind of models. The data sources are going to become more varied, and that's actually one of the hardest things, is getting all this data. as I'm sure you know. Usually you also have experts that are just somehow getting all this data and normalizing it into one database. It's sort of the same game. Maybe I've been into it in it too long, but it seems like sort of the same game, but you need to abstract what it is that how you're thinking of it. So one of the things I've come to realize over my tenure thinking about these things is that all of these models that we're talking about, all of the math, I really don't think it gets at the essence of what the human decision process that's going on. I spent a few years doing marketing attribution, which is what we talked about on the first podcast. And you have these logistic models to find out the value of exposure to different media types, and what is making you buy something, what's making the sale, what's making the click. And I think there's something much in what you're doing is you're kind of looking at all the data that you can collect, and kind of like you're doing the thing a data person would do, is trying to run a model against that. But I think that what's going on is there's some much more complex sort of psychological process that's going on in the brain. And here's an example. You have BMW, and maybe you're a big fancy consulting company. You're coming up with advertising attribution models for BMW. So what makes people buy a BMW? Is it that click? Is it that Google click ad? Is it the billboard? Is it the magazine ad they saw when they were a kid in Popular Mechanics or something? And they're, how do you attribute all that? And I think it's just, I think we oversimplify the problem by turning it into like a pure data model. I think the true way of modeling this would be to approach it almost from a neuroscience kind of way. And you would have to build a model of how the brain works. And you'd be, a real neural network, but you would be building more of a neuroscience forward type of understanding of human understanding, and kind of back into how advertising works against that. And that's not how we do how any of this stuff works, to my knowledge, in the industry at all. No one's. There are some companies that are looking at computer models like these.
It's real bleeding edge, iffy stuff, though, from my understanding.
Yeah, probably. Just my opinion. So I don't think it can be done now. I don't think anyone's really doing it, but I think it's the way you'd really need to do it if you really wanted to take all this to the next level. You'd almost want to build a model of each person's brain and everything they've been exposed to over their entire life. This stuff gets kind of scary if you think about it too much.
Well, there's two ways to look at it. I can look at it and say it's hyper-personalization. I'm not going to be annoyed with things that don't apply to me. It's even going to tailor advertising to what I care about. Like, I'm not particularly interested in cars. I might want to know about the sound system over the manufacturer. And if it could know that about me, there could be value adds in the way I get information about cars. Although I don't want to buy a car right now, so maybe it would still be annoying. Then there's the dystopic version of this, where it's kind of adversarially trying to reprogram your brain to like a product. Where do you fall on the spectrum?
I mean, personally, I wouldn't mind having the thing I really need presented to me, but you very quickly slide into showing me things I don't need. And like, what do I really need? I don't really need very much. So I would kind of lean towards having a more sophisticated system like this, as long as I could turn it off. Now, the problem, I think, is that maybe you have a knob and you can turn all this noise down, and you can turn it all the way down so you get no advertising at all. You can turn it all the way up so that you get a lot of advertising or maybe, but it's exactly what you are looking for somehow, or what you think you need. The problem with that, I think you'd have to pay to turn it all the way down to 0.
That seems reasonable to me, right?
Yeah.
I can configure the degree to which I want to pay versus get things for free. Mm-hmm. That sounds virtuous.
Yeah, I mean, that would be perhaps an okay in between sort of future.
I'll submit to advertising for an hourly wage and just sit there and consume it.
Yeah, maybe the model would be, and there's probably the models like this. You get your computer, your phone, your TV, all the services. You get all that for free, but there's going to be ads all over it.
That's essentially the model we have.
Yeah, it's what we have. Yeah.
Without the dialability, sometimes you can go ad free for a fee, but it's very binary.
Yeah.
If we're broadly speaking, under modeling these systems and failing to capture some of these features, what's the consequence for us as consumers that are having ads broadcast to us?
Well, I think we are probably being encouraged to buy stuff we don't need. You're probably also being encouraged to buy just exactly the thing you think you need. And there are I've been at System 1 for the last 7 years, and one of the things that we do is come up with models to buy the thing that or to advertise the thing that you don't know that you need, or you don't know that you're looking for. And so I think there is some missed opportunity there where you're just sort of like only going one layer deep most of the time. But maybe if you're searching for dog food, you also are looking for gardening tools, things like that. Or maybe there's, you can go deeper than that. But yeah, I think that maybe if we knew more about who you were as a person, there'd be maybe a little bit more holistic approach, a presentation approach of the types of things that you need, or maybe the quality or the level of thing that you need. So maybe you really like really cheap toenail cutters, and so you don't want to be advertised the fancy ones, and and then they know there's all these sort of unexpected correlations. I think that can be leveraged more.
So you were on both sides of the table of this. You've managed the distribution of ads and control of them, and you've obviously been exposed to them.
Yeah.
Do you have a different perspective than the average person, knowing a little bit about the wiring behind the ad?
Yeah, I'm probably a little more cynical. I do use ad blockers. I try not to see ads, but when I do see them, and you are reading content that has display ads that are supporting it, I'm also a little bit sympathetic that's the way that publisher is making a living. Mm-hmm. That's maybe I'm reading a really cool article that I didn't pay a paywall for, and there's some display ads on there. I kind of get it. That's how they're keeping the lights on. That's how some forms of journalism are supported. Mm-hmm. And so there is a little bit of a virtuous angle you can go at with some of this ad tech that people will tell you about as well.
So there's a lot of reasons a person might install an ad blocker. What motivates you to do it?
One is speed.
Sure. Yep.
So the page is load a little fast. In some cases, it's ridiculous how slow. There's a lot going on when a page loads. There might be 100 people competing in a dynamic auction before that page even gets rendered.
So as I'm sitting there watching the spinning wheel, what's going on?
You might have Google saying, hey, I got somebody here who is rendering this page. Anybody want to put their display ad there? 50 people tell Google what they're willing to pay. Google takes the winner according to their algorithm, whatever that is, and then sends that to the page to be rendered. This is all happening, hopefully, in under a second, but sometimes more, which is a problem. Yeah, the other thing, I don't like the clutter on the page sometimes, so that's one of the other reasons I use an ad blocker.
Sure. Well, you've got young kids. I don't know how much screen time they get or whatever, but do you have any thoughts on exposing ads to them as they grow up?
That's a good question. We've been pretty limited with the screen time. They have started to watch some YouTube videos, and I have premium YouTube, so I don't have the ads. And for some reason, my wife doesn't have it on her phone. So I've been thinking of getting that. They already know about the concept of ads because, sometimes an ad will pop up before their kid video. And I really, now that I'm talking about it, I should really get that premium set up for them because they do already know what an ad is. And I think that those images and those sort of angles that those ads take and the language and the sounds, already are influencing them, or at least, maybe they're learning to block them out early. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I have a friend, his kids are older than yours. They call them skip ads.
Yep. Nice.
That's all they're used to, just click skip.
Yep.
Where do you see the field going? What's changing about ad tech, and what does the future have in store for us?
Going back again to the example of business.com, when we bought that traffic from Google and ran it to our own standard listing pages, that kind of thing a lot of that doesn't exist anymore. And those margins that we were making, I think we are making 60% margins on some of that, those purchases. So those kinds of margins don't exist anymore. The whole system has become more efficient. Google can charge more, and they can pay partners less. And I think there's more of that sophistication, more of those sort of opportunities to reverse engineer they're getting harder, so you have to get smarter. Google has options to turn on that kind of thing. If you're advertising with Google, maybe 15 years ago, you had to, maybe you're a small company, you could run some of these models yourself, or maybe do some of this in Excel and find out the right bid that you thought. But now you can just tell Google to do it for you. And a lot of the people that are that you can buy advertising through are starting, they're all offering their own versions of this type of optimization where you can essentially, there's lots of different flavors of it, but you tell them how much you're willing to pay for an acquisition of a user, and then they'll optimize to it given your budget and other parameters that you set. And so more of that optimization is getting pushed into the providers, the ad providers.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't think it's a good thing for these sort of middle providers, like a business.com. You're taking out the margin from them. It might be good for the advertisers. It's definitely good for Google, though.
Oh, sure.
And so that's how you know it's maybe not a good thing for other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, Google's definitely using that to their advantage to squeeze them the most out of everything.
And do you, in terms of where, I don't know if you were serious about the neural connected idea or not, but do you think that's a plausible future we're going to see?
I haven't thought about that, like being plugged in.
Yeah, or having some sort of biofeedback or something like that.
Yeah, I haven't thought about a lot, other than that I'm not going to be a participant in that, probably.
Yeah. I'm
not necessarily against it, but I'm going to be like the old guy that doesn't get plugged in and people will laugh at me, but I'm going to be just fine. Don't worry about me. I think that maybe before we get there, we'll have more of the augmented reality type of thing. There's a really great artist, forgetting his name now, but you can search for hyper reality advertising. I forget his name. They're really dystopic, futuristic versions of augmented reality with advertising, and that I think they're really creative, but also really scary. And I think that's more likely to happen first before being plugged in.
Well, where are opportunities for young, hungry, mathematically oriented computer scientists to do something interesting in this space today?
Yeah, I think we really need, like I was saying, I think we really need to think differently about how we model these things. So I know I'm late to the game, and I think maybe this is an area that you've specialized in the past, but I've been researching more about reinforcement learning and thinking about how that might be applied to some of these ad tech problems. And all in all, I think it's a particular type of a rigorous framework to frame other optimization and algorithms, inside of. But thinking back again to that full funnel, sort of the full ad experience, I think that we can look at that and model that in very different ways. And maybe this is where deep learning kind of techniques, or look at here's something. So when a web page is rendered, there's content and maybe some ads and different elements on there. A lot of times the way that's modeled, say if you're the person doing the ad tech, it's parameterized. You know that this thing showed maybe in this space or in this unit at this rank. But I think there's an opportunity to look at it completely differently. Imagine if you just had all these exposures of advertising and how the page is rendered, and probably they're all unique. So every person's seeing a slightly different thing over time and during their day, and depending on who you are. What if you captured those as images and actually applied some sort of image learning to these things instead, and looked at them and let the system learn how to parameterize that experience rather than sort of forcing the parameterization. And so that would be a radically different way of doing this. And you might find out, this might be a backdoor into what we were talking about looking at the actual psychology, because if you set it up right and had like a alpha zero type of thing looking at this, it might identify something that is very unexpected and something that we weren't measuring before, which actually really matters.
Sure.
And so I think that there might be an opportunity there. You'd have to get that data set. I don't know if it exists. You'd have to create it. You have to buy it.
You'd need a huge data set, but the internet's good at that.
Thinking about, that's a wild idea in this sort of space, but that could be interesting.
Yeah. And what's the consumer experience you anticipate if that were running at scale?
It might be something magical. Maybe it'd be something really smooth, or maybe it'd be something completely unexpected. But if you really built a system that was able to understand how the human brain was interpreting this information in a more accurate way, you might come up with better experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you were there at the Neural Information Processing conference.
Yeah, we bumped into each other in Long Beach a few years ago.
And the DeepMind had the talk about AlphaGo, AlphaZero, and that stuff was really amazing to me. And so so they were teaching it how to play chess, and then they're like, oh, instead of feeding it, it's known chess games which are all recorded, you could play it against itself. It knows nothing about any of the history of chess. And so they played it, and it was learning against itself by playing itself and like using the next best set of rules that it came up with to compete. And they saw it, and it learned the basic rules. I'm not a chess player, but it learned these basic sort of patterns that humans know. And then it took it a few days on these probably huge, expensive machines. And then all of a sudden it discarded those. And it came up with this new set of patterns that we haven't never seen before that work even better. And I was like, that's where it's at. It's where we can have machines that learn the stuff that we don't know. There's like a whole universe of like models, and up until now, most of sort of the algorithms and artificial intelligence are trying to model the stuff that we know. But there's a much larger universe of all the stuff we don't know or haven't thought of. And like, I think we can build machines that are going to come up with like models for that stuff that's sort of outside. So coming up with these patterns that we otherwise couldn't come up with. It's actually generating and adding to our human database of knowledge in new and novel ways. And yeah, so turn that on advertising. I don't know if that's a good idea, but it could make a much better experience or an unexpected experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's wind up. Do you think the future is dystopic or positive on the topic of advertising? What will be our relationship to this?
I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be fine. I think we'll be able to. I think we'll reject it if it gets too dirty and disgusting. And I think we'll come up with even better ways of helping people. What you're doing with advertising is you're helping people make sort of decisions for their life, the daily decisions, and I think there's better ways to do that, and I think we'll come up with it, and I think we'll come up with it because it's even better for business at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely has that potential.
So yeah, I'm an optimist. I think things are gonna. I think we have a bright future.
Well, that's good to hear.